Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Professor Sides, and this course is Principles of Microeconomics. This is the last segment of the lecture, Chapter 4, The Market Forces of Supply and Demand. And if you all will recall, this chapter has been about the foundations of economics. Remember that economics is the study of market behavior or market interactions. And we've looked at the components of the market, the demand side, the buyer side, the supply side, the seller side, and we've talked about the components of not only just the components of the market, but we've talked about the behavior and the consequences. Now we need to, in this last segment, analyze the changes that happen as a result of the change in equilibrium. Before we do that, however, we need to go back over again the difference between quantity supplied and supplied, demand and quantity demanded, and then we also need to go over the difference between shift versus movement. When we have a change in supply, basically what we see is a shift in the curve. That is of the supply curve. Remember, we said that technology, input prices, the number of buyers, and expectations, those are factors that would cause the supply curve to shift, the entire curve to shift. That means we have a change in supply. If, however, we only change the price of a product, then what we've done is there's been a change in quantity supplied, which means that there is movement along the supply curve. And likewise, if we have a change in demand, that means the entire demand curve has shifted either to the left or to the right, and that is due to changes other than price. That could be the number of buyers, that could be taste and preferences, that could be expectations, that could be income. So when those change and price remains constant, we say there's a change in demand, meaning the entire curve shifts. If we have change in quantity demanded, that means that only the price has changed and we have movement along the curve. When we have a change, and this is a change in a factor other than price, that change will cause the supply curve and or the demand curve to shift. And when the curve shifts, that changes the equilibrium. And when we change the equilibrium, remember the equilibrium is that point of intersection between supply and demand. And when we change the equilibrium, there are some effects or some consequences. Now, to analyze or to understand or to pull apart what those changes mean, we have to determine we look at what the effects are, and then that helps us to determine how we analyze the equilibrium, And so we do this by first deciding whether or not the events shift the supply curve, the demand curve, or both. So if we see that gas prices went from $3.49 to $3.29, did it cause a shift in the supply curve or the demand curve or both? In that instance, only price changed. We went from $3.49 to $3.29. So neither the supply curve nor the demand curve shifted. It was just a change in price. So equilibrium did not change. However, when we look at world events and we see terroristic threats in the Middle East, we see bombings of some sort, or we hear rumors of a war in the Middle East in an oil-producing country, that expectation is either going to shift the supply curve or the demand curve or both. So first we have to determine whether the event that takes place, whether it is a supply curve shifter, a demand curve shifter, or both. And then once we determine whether or not the event shifts the curve, then we have to decide, number two, in which direction is it shifting the curve? Does it shift it on the supply side outward to the right or inward to the left? And or does it shift the demand curve outward to the right or inward to the left? Depending upon how it shifts, that will determine where the equilibrium will fall, whether the equilibrium will be at a higher price or lower price. And then the third and final step that we use to analyze changes in the equilibrium is to use the supply-demand diagram, the chart, the graph, to see how that shift changed the equilibrium price and quantity. Again, did it shift it up? Did it shift the equilibrium price up or down? And did it shift the equilibrium quantity to the left or to the right? Thank you again. This was the conclusion of Chapter 4, the market forces of supply and demand. I look forward to speaking with you again with the next chapter. Have a good day.